Okay, so my name is Robin Dougherty, and I am the librarian for Middle East Studies at Yale University, and I'm welcoming everyone to the second day of MELA programming. So this morning's session is, this is embarrassing. Here we go. This morning's session is, the theme is remote access, digital humanities, and web archiving in response to crisis. And I would like to call up our first speaker, who is Heather.
Okay, hi everyone. Nice to see you all. My name is Heather Hughes. I'm the Middle Eastern Studies librarian at the University of Pennsylvania. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm going to talk a bit about Hazine today, a project that hopefully a number of you are familiar with. Hazine, a guide to researching the Middle East and beyond. So I'm going to start with talking a bit about the background of Hazine. It was started by two Ottoman historians, Nir Shafir and Chris Markovitz, as a bit of a repository for library and archives reviews. The impetus for this was that not all cultural heritage institutions with Middle East collections have robust web presences, and that these guides could make research trips easier and also to highlight less known about collections and resources. So if we were to look at an example, let's see, an example of one of these reviews, it basically provides a bit of information about the background of the repository, highlights within the collection, and what the research experience is like, what kind of language experiences you might have with other personnel or interfaces, and then also how the access is, and sort of logistical things too, like what's the transport and food situation there, and also contact information. So it was really kind of to help let people know about different resources and also to help people kind of plan their research trips. I was invited to join in 2016 to provide more of a librarian perspective. And one of the things that I wanted to do as part of Hazine is add a bit more of librarian perspectives and participation. So I did a few of these interviews with librarians, with a few MELA members, so appreciate folks who participated in that. I think in general, we had a bit of a capacity issue because we all were having full-time jobs. So at some point we had a bit of a hard time kind of putting out content. In 2018, I invited Nadira and Mansour to join Hazine as a team, and she's a graduate student at Princeton. I'd been working with her on a couple of her posts and enjoyed working with her, so I thought that would be fun and productive. And we sort of took Hazine over and had a sort of a soft coup and had a bit of a relaunch in 2018 with a broader mission in terms of supporting Middle East research and teaching, and also more active social media. And I think Mansour has been particularly good at sort of cultivating a sense of community on our Twitter account. We've also welcomed more creative pieces that don't necessarily fit into that genre of archive and library reviews. So under essays, you can kind of see a few creative essays that address research and cultural heritage, but are perhaps defy sort of easy categorization. So that's been fun to kind of expand into as well. We've also added a couple team members, including Shabir Agha Abbas, who is our manuscripts editor, and Marwa Kadella, who is our arts editor. And I think that's been really nice in terms of thinking about how art and design fits into the information and also research landscape. So I wanted to talk a bit about how we solicit pieces. So we're generally open for pitches. So if you ever are interested in writing something, you can always feel free to contact us. We've also invited people to write based on geographic and thematic gaps and identifying potential contributions of interest. So we're definitely wanting to have sort of diverse content in terms of regions, ethnic groups, linguistic resources. And another fun way of identifying contributions has been kind of seeing well-developed threads on Twitter, or sort of seeing people posting about research trips on Twitter and then being like, hey, you've sort of already written this kind of well put together thread. Do you think you could turn that into an article? And that's been kind of a nice way to get content. We do have submission guidelines if you're ever like thinking about how you would structure such a piece, or yeah, how you would write about a collection or archive review. In terms of how Hazine has operated during the pandemic, I think at first we were a bit unsure about publishing archives reviews because we felt that you know, we weren't sure when people were going to be able to travel, and we thought it might be a bit insensitive, but at some point there was kind of no end in sight for the pandemic, and we didn't want to keep authors waiting. And we also thought that archives reviews could be helpful in terms of helping people plan for the future, and that hopefully people could kind of travel through some of these archives pieces. So like we published a really nice piece from Celeste Gianni about the Vatican Library, and like in addition to just having a really thorough helpful piece, she also like talked about the food, and I was like, oh well, if I can't go to Italy, at least I can read this really nice piece about about researching in Rome. So we did go ahead with publishing with this sort of note that we realized that most places are closed and that health is absolutely the most important thing for both library and archives workers as well as researchers. But I would say that in general, a lot of our recent posts have kind of talked about digital resources, such as this recent piece on Afghanistan. We also had a piece on modern Egypt by Mimi Fayez that talked about digital resources, and also like MENA doc. So definitely having like pieces that could help people in terms of identifying digital resources during this time, and also kind of highlighting those resources through social media. And I know that a lot of people have been referring to our pieces on digital archives. So we have a wonderful list maintained by Nadira on online archives and digital collections. And another great resource we have is this guide to online visual sources on the Middle East, North Africa, and Islamic studies, and that's maintained by our lovely colleague, Amanda Henry-Steinberg. So I think I appreciate people who have sort of pointed to those in workshops that they've given on remote research during the pandemic. Another kind of bright spot that that Hazine was able to accomplish during the pandemic is to fundraise and meet our goals to sustain operating costs as well as pay contributors. So basically, in addition to paying fees for maintaining the website, we kind of wanted to pay contributors as a way to model more ethical labor practices, and also to get more diverse content ethically. And we really appreciate the people who contributed. I think it was really, I know I was very moved by the sort of outpouring of support that we got, and especially with it being like a difficult time to donate to things. So that was very much appreciated. And ways you can support Hazine's work. I know that folks are already using it as a reference, so continue to do that. If you rely on Hazine and are in a position to support us financially, please consider contributing. And also, I'd love to see more folks from MELA consider writing for us, whether it's about collections at your institution or some of the work that you're doing, or really anything kind of broadly related to these different topics of research and cultural heritage. I would love to hear from you. And that's all I have for today. I'm gonna pass it on to my colleagues, to Peter and Sean, my comrades who are also producing very helpful content in the online sphere.
Hi, my name is Sean Swanick. I'm the librarian for Middle East and Islamic Studies at Duke University in North Carolina. Today, my colleague Peter Magierski at Columbia University and I are going to present about Amir. So I'll begin without further ado. The Prince of Websites, Amir, short for Access to Middle East and Islamic Resources, debuted in 2010. Indeed, the project began as a consequence of a series of conversations between Charles Jones and Peter Magierski about the need for a tool to assemble and distribute information on open access material relating to the Middle East and Islamic studies. Amir emulates Charles Jones's Ancient World Online, AWOL, as a model. In a short time, Peter assembled a small team consisting of Charles himself, followed by Andreas, Newman, Birte, Christiansen, and myself, all of whom happen to have the greatest jobs in the world, librarians. The project, hosted by Blogspot, has since evolved into an essential resource for any and all interested in the Middle East and Islamic studies. To date, we've had nearly 1.2 million page views from all over the world. Amir collects a broad range of materials from digitized newspapers, journals, and manuscripts to pertinent project websites and everything in between. We strive to assemble and distribute an assortment of resources inclusive of those that may not be cataloged. The criteria for collecting is straightforward. First, the material must be open access, meaning the material is available to all readers worldwide needing only the internet to gain access. And two, the source must be legal and legit. Example, we will not link illegal pirated materials. You have to go to the Internet Archive for that. At last count, there were nearly 1,400 items documented and stored on Amir. Each resource is provided a tag or tags, which act as surrogate Library of Congress subject headings, though created by members of Amir. There are some 250 tags on the Amir website currently and still continue to grow and adapt to the resources we upload on a regular basis. Peter?
Sean?
Yep.
Thank you. Let me share my screen then.
Okay.
My name is Peter Magierski. I'm librarian for Middle East Islamic Studies at Columbia University. And in my portion of this presentation, I will elaborate on some of the points that Sean mentioned in the introduction and the overview. In the process, I will illustrate and highlight some of the interesting resources with live website and feature some of the content. I'll talk about the challenges of collecting open access resources, the lack of proper description of the content, and the perennial problems with disappearing content. I'll talk about, I will share and illustrate some of the observations related to the increased traffic on Amir website over the last few months in relation to COVID pandemic. And then I'll talk hopefully in conversation with you about need to collaborate and archive these at-risk resources. As Sean mentioned, the goal of Amir is to collect and distribute information about open access resources to researchers and students of Middle East and Islam. Our goal has become even more pronounced in the recent months when researchers and students with affiliations to academic institutions were suddenly left off without access to the library and available resources. Regardless of the pandemic, we have always intended Amir to be of interest to independent scholars in the US and around the world who may not have the benefit of well-funded libraries that are able to acquire often very expensive digital collections. Although we will focus on our own project, it is worth mentioning that there are many other projects and platforms that have similar goals of sharing open access information. Amir uses Google's Blogger platform. The interface is very user-friendly for readers as well as for administrators. It has a decent reporting and statistics functionality. Since Blogger is owned by Google, Amir's postings may actually benefit from higher ranking in the Google search results, which is an added benefit. What do we collect on Amir? Sean mentioned that we collect digitized newspapers, journals, manuscripts, open access ebooks, miscellaneous project websites related to the Middle East and Islamic studies. How do we collect? We receive information about open access items from many sources. We monitor a variety of digital humanities lists, Twitter. We hear from our librarian colleagues. We are often contacted by project managers interested in promoting their new digital project on our blog. Finally, we rely on subscribers who receive regular updates on any new postings. How do we organize each post? As librarians, we try to be thorough in preparing individual posts on Amir. We will list creators of digital collections. We will provide ISBNs for ebooks. We will provide alternative transliteration of digitized historical newspapers, including the original script, frequency, dates of coverage, place of publications, etc. These so-called access points ensure better discoverability in the disorganized internet environment. On the other hand, fuller description of each of these resources is usually available on the original linked to a website. So I'm going to share an example, show you an example. So this is our website, and
Peter, we aren't seeing your slides. We're only seeing the agenda.
Oops. Sorry. How about now?
I don't know what I'm looking at.
It's just a white line.
Yep.
Sorry, guys. Just 1 second. Well, for that reason, I have actually have some screenshots. Apparently I cannot share that. So
no, we can see it now. We can see it now.
Okay,
but
that's a PowerPoint. Yeah, that's a PowerPoint.
It,
so I'm going to run it from the PowerPoint. So sample description from Amir post, just related to the kind of trying to be thorough in describing. For instance, we have we provide alternative titles, we provide script data, we provide coverage, dates of coverage. Okay, so oops. So just bear with me a second.
it might be the roller wheel on your mouse that you use to advance.
Can you see it now? Can you see the? Yeah.
No, I see the same slide that you were showing, sample description of the Amir post.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Try your right or left arrows, see if that works. There you go. There you go.
Okay, so so I'm going to show a couple of interesting sites worth mentioning. And Heather mentioned MENA. This is one of the fantastic sites that is rather not recognized in the US and has tons of really thousands and thousands of open access resources. In this case, this is Islamkundliche Untersuchungen. Over 400 out of print in public domain titles from Schwarz Verlag. These are unlikely to be found in the in the World Catalog. So he is another one, probably well known to others, but Arabic Collections Online. We have been following the development of this project over several years. This site now has over 11,000 items on the open access public domain items in Arabic from digitized from participating libraries. Here is another one, select Turkish historical newspapers from Istanbul University. These are unlikely to be found in the catalogs. So moving to the challenges. Very few of these open access resources which are created and curated by smaller or foreign institutions are cataloged. These preferably would be properly cataloged and discoverable in a consolidated catalog like WorldCat. One may ask why this is not the case. As we know, cataloging departments these days are notoriously short-staffed and are struggling with timely cataloging of resources in the resources the library pays for, and often discourage requests to catalog web resources that involve staff to provide subject and content analysis of original descriptions of such resources. Another issue is broken links. An online resource may be here today, but it's gone tomorrow. This is a frequent problem that affects all of internet content. The reasons for disappearing links or contents are many. Loss of funding, retirement of principal investigators, programmers, obsolete technology. No project or institution is immune to these challenges, as can probably be testified by some of our colleagues present today. Sometimes fixing a broken link is trivial. Content has been moved to another server. We at AMIR try to follow up and correct links to content that has been moved. We are, however, helpless when an institution decides to take the content offline or to monetize it by entering into partnerships with commercial publishers. I don't think I have a live link. I mean, I do, but I can't show you. But for instance, we have identified several years ago Al-Ahram, an archive of Al-Ahram going back to 1876 that was made available briefly, but it was as an open access resource. This has become a commercialized access. Another example is newspaper archives from National Library of Turkey. This has been posted, it has been available for a few months and then disappeared again. These were dozens of newspapers that have been digitized. We try not to remove previous postings, but because we find this is helpful to people who may follow up and try to contact these original publishers and maybe follow up and retrieve that content. So let's talk about how has been traffic on our website. This is let me move this. Our website has, as Sean mentioned, visited over 1 million times over the years. Last month it was, close to. Oops, sorry. Last month it was several. Sorry, guys. 8,000 hits. This month is over 4,000 hits. These are not impressive numbers, but perhaps they are for the audience that we intend this to be. As far as the access over the last few months, so this is a record of a spike in recent activity in the last few months. And this is a distribution by country. The last few months, you see that of course, U.S. is the primary country that accesses our website, but there are countries that may not have easy access to other content. So this is the last 6 months, and in the last 12 months, the last 6 months, a different set of countries, which is quite telling. Finally, as I have mentioned, there is a need to collaborate to identify these resources, to collaborate on describing, cataloging, and hopefully on archiving some of those at-risk resources. I will stop here, and I welcome your comments and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Sean, would you like to hand off?
Sean,
we're not hearing you. Unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry about that. So next up will be Deborah Schlein and Sean Swanick. Deborah works at Princeton University, and Sean still works at Duke University. So our presentation will be a pandemic project, web archiving social responses to COVID-19. As the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the world, it became apparent that with all the new interpretations of novel coronavirus, COVID-19 being published on the web, that librarians must mobilize to preserve the documented record. To the rescue is the Ivy Plus web archiving project, which was initiated by our colleague, Dr. Ellen Ambrosone of Princeton University. Okay, Robin, thank you. Dr. Ambrosone, the librarian for South Asia, invited a number of colleagues to participate in what has become the largest Ivy Plus web archiving project. At the time of writing, there were some 5,000 websites or pages nominated to be archived, in addition to the 1,700 that have already been archived. This presentation will provide insights to the development of the project, how it fits with similar projects, some examples of the sites we discovered, and some of the challenges we faced. For those unfamiliar with the Ivy Plus web archiving program, it is operated from Columbia University by the talented and indefatigable Samantha Abrams. A list of projects can be found on the website, and I'll dump it into the chat afterwards. This COVID project began in March of the pandemic year 2020, and will continue for the foreseeable future. The project began with 6 curators.
Sean, if you launch the presentation, it should be easy to advance.
Okay, sorry.
There you go. Yeah.
Thanks for the text message. The project began with 6 curators that grow into 29, as you can see here. Curators collecting websites from most parts of the world and in numerous languages. In addition to the 29 curators, there is a nomination site, which I'll put in the chat afterwards, for colleagues to help out. At this point, we'd like to thank Guy Barak of NYU and Abdus Salam of the Library of Congress, Islamabad, who both provided many websites to us. The project strives to archive content from and serve as a blanket repository for the expeditious archiving of a broad range of websites related to COVID-19 from Eastern Europe, Russia, and other territories of the former Soviet Union, Latin America and the Caribbean, the Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and recently we added the Pacific Islands. The collection will focus on social responses to the COVID-19 crisis, as represented in local news, NGOs, art, blogs, and social media, and popular movements rather than national news and national government initiatives. The project determined through a comparison with other known projects at the time we began, example, the IIPC or the International Internet Preservation Consortium of 32 members. The last time I checked, they had somewhere around 3 terabytes of websites being archived. Those are all, of course, with national government websites. Another similar project is that of the National Library of Medicine, which is collecting federal, state, and local government COVID-19 pages. In addition, the recently launched Mufti Ships archive project includes a section on COVID-19 fatwa, thanks to the generous and collaborative support of Dr. Adnan Zulfikar of Rutgers University. Finally, Charlotte Giles, of the South Asia expert at the Library of Congress and a curator on this project, helped further define the project vis-a-vis LC's project. In short, we made every effort possible to fill gaps in collecting the COVID-19. The project at the beginning was a daunting task: how to find COVID-19 social responses when, especially in the beginning, there was little consensus on the name of the disease, or in fact, what the disease is. Lexicons for the new terms being used or created were quickly put online. Coronavirus, epidemic, OER, Arabic roots and routes, but also newspapers like Sabah provided some terminology. But other sites like the NGO portal Arab.org helped us situate some of the more common NGOs in the region, as well as fuel ideas as to where to search. A shout out to other sites like Ajah Media, curated by Rustam Zakar and colleagues, also helped tremendously, especially with music in the early days. The AUB libraries have an excellent subject guide on Arab cartoonists. And some of the prominent terms included Khalek Bilbayt, not just a Ferouz song, the Al Jazair Haraka Corona. And then there were other expressions like this Algerian slogan, Torah Corona Zaidu Antuma, linking the many months of protests against the government with the hope of ridding the country of both the government and the virus. In Turkish, simple terms like Evde Kal brought back all kinds of interesting results, such as the newly stylized Ottoman poetry, as well as art, such as this image here, Lütfen Evde Kal, which is kind of cute. There's all kinds of music on the web as well. There are many new videos and songs. Example, Chantal Bitar, the Lebanese singer Chantal Bitar, Behajar Asahi, or the very charming Turkish Corona Hoş Geldin by Asane, which I'll put in the chat afterward. Once the sites were nominated, we created a number of different metadata entries in an effort to ensure easy discovery of what is documented. This is where the organic aspect of the project took on a new life. We have a metadata team, which now consists of 6 curators, was originally 3. Because Archiveit, the source that we're using, isn't sophisticated enough to allow string searches, we thought initially that we could kind of trick Archiveit by creating pseudo strings. So a category field, and you can see here on the left, activism, activist art and culture, etc. And then we would also create another field for Library of Congress subject headings. But the second part, the Library of Congress subject headings, proved limiting and daunting, simply because we have too many websites. We actually just completed the work yesterday, created a new metadata guide by including more category fields and by fields for organization type. Or archives, libraries, museums, charitable trusts and foundations, etc., in a format field for blogs and bibliographies. So that's me. So Deborah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deborah Schlein. I'm the Near Eastern Studies librarian at Princeton University. And thank you, Sean, for passing it on to me. So we had a lot of questions come up. What you're seeing here is the spreadsheet we used. The biggest question, of course, and I'm sure many of you are already thinking about this, was social media websites. As with every web archiving project, social media is always a question and a difficulty. And since it's ever changing, our parameters and abilities were constantly changing too. So if you'll forgive me just a second. This is one of the tweets that we worked with. Murad Diori works on OER Arabic roots and roots. We were collecting things like these tweets, Facebook pages and groups, Instagram pages, everything really that was relevant on major social media sites. We would add that to our spreadsheet, as well as non-major social media web pages. Things like Arabic vocabulary, Turkish art on Corona, a number of the things that Sean has already mentioned. Samantha Abrams, our leader in all things web archiving, had explained in May, when we were working on this project quite a lot, that Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram might prove difficult. And over the summer, our understanding of what social media could be archived narrowed down considerably. So as we were adding in social media pages, we were also trying to add in their origin pages outside of social media when they had them. So here's a Facebook page, which Robin has commented. Here's a Facebook page for a specific radio station. This is essentially a pirate radio movement aimed at Algerians that speaks more broadly to the Arab world in Arabic and French. And it also has an origin page on SoundCloud where all of the episodes were located. So we found that having both of these sites in the spreadsheet was better in case the social media platforms grew finicky. And ultimately, we realized that updates that are constantly happening in the back end of social media websites can and do trip up the archiving process. So Instagram recently changed its settings and now requires a login to view individual images, which Archivit, our crawler, cannot do. And Twitter had recently updated its rate limit, so the crawler was hitting that limit faster, which resulted in captures displaying error messages instead of the tweets that we wanted to archive. Other forms of social media, however, have proven less problematic. Tumblr works. Telegram is archivable. YouTube and Vimeo can also be crawled. And much of this has to do with social media formats having a web interface. Because of this need, however, WhatsApp and Snapchat cannot be archived. And with Snapchat, of course, that's not the point. So that makes a lot of sense. In short, social media sites are always changing and our ability to archive them changes with their updates. So the lesson learned here was that archiving social media is not impossible, but it does take a lot of work to keep up with the changes. Another question that came up was how these sites, just moving stuff around for you guys, here we go, how these sites would be organized by subject. And so Sean mentioned a little bit of this, the Library of Congress subject headings that we were talking about. We were thinking these would help users to find material that they would be interested in based on general topic. So as the archive was a COVID-19 responses archive, every site that was added to the spreadsheet got this COVID-19 disease subject heading. And this is a subject heading that appears to have come out around April or May. And we started adding it to the spreadsheet by the end of May. Conversations, as Sean mentioned, about subject headings are ongoing. Things like news media, art, dictionaries, languages, but we're also considering categories such as country and geographic coverage and language, which would be separate from these subject headings. For future projects, we want to add people who work with languages that maybe we do not. Things like Armenian, Azeri, Kurdish material would have been great to add. Obviously, Sean and I are only human, we can't catch everything, but projects like this deserve broad linguistic coverage, particularly since the Middle East was just one region of the world being covered, and language was not meant to be an obstacle, it was meant to be a strength. Sean and I had emailed the MELA listserv back during the summer, and we got a couple of replies, but we'd like to have more coverage, particularly again, when it comes to languages we don't know. So please, please feel free to add your suggestions through the nomination form that we will be putting in the chat, because this project, like this pandemic, is ongoing. And again, this is the spreadsheet we have. The green is stuff that has worked very well. The yellow, which, yeah, there's a yellow one. The yellow is mostly social media websites that are experiencing issues, and the white is we're still trying to figure out if it will work or not. I have one more thing to add, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen first. And I would like to say that I want to cover what it is to have to deal with sort of the mental labor doing a project like this. So particularly, mental labor and the mental health involved with that. Most of our presentation has covered the details of how we did this work and what snags we hit along the way. And, I think that's right for a librarians conference such as ours, but I also think it would be wrong to ignore the mental labor that went into this COVID-19 web archiving project and how that can affect mental health. Because again, we're all human, and any work more directly related to the pandemic is going to take its toll in different ways than that is not pandemic related. When Sean and I were doing the bulk of this work, it was April and May, the beginnings of a downward slope in case numbers in the US, particularly in New York, where I was, and we were working from home. I think it's important to acknowledge that just because this work was from home does not mean that that work was any easier than it would have been if we were in the office. It was taxing in its own way purely because of its subject matter, which was happening at that very moment outside our doors and in our neighborhoods, to our neighbors, to our friends. And I'm sure you all can relate because most of us were probably and still are probably working from home. Mental health and work-life balance are important without a pandemic going on, and certainly more so during one. So focusing the workday around a project like this, when you've maybe tried very hard to curate your COVID-19 news intake to stay mentally healthy, requires a kind of intentional approach to the work. For me, that meant 2 hours on this and then go do something else with intentional breaks in between. Maybe some days I worked on this for 30 minutes, maybe I didn't work on it at all some days. For others, that may have looked different. But we have to give ourselves breaks to make it through work like this, and frankly, through crises like the ones that we're living through now. So my ultimate point is that, yes, this is work that is important and meaningful and worthwhile, but when we do this kind of work, we need to keep in mind our own limits and boundaries. And that's where I shall end the presentation for today. And I'm going to hand it off now to Joan Weeks.
Heather, can you tell us about the food tips that one can find in Hazine?
Hi. So like each of the archive reviews kind of talks about food options that are nearby, like whether the archive has like a little cafe or just like what is kind of good and cheap nearby. So yeah, that's pretty much, there's like a food in transit sort of section for each review.
That's good. That is very important, I would say.
Actually, I have a little comment for Heather too. You guys need to have a little pronunciation guide there, because I keep hearing your site pronounced as Hazine, and people say, does it mean it's sad? Or is it Hebrew and it's like Razine, or, and I say, no, it's Turkish, it's Turkish. Maybe you could like make the title of your site multilingual, and so that it's a little clearer for people who speak the various languages. But it's been an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure. I think yeah, we got like angry messages one time from a woman who wanted us to like, it was like, this is an Arabic word, like.
Finally, this time it's perfect. Sorry about that, everybody. They seem to have frozen the last time, so I think we're good to go. So this presentation, I think I'm Joan Weeks. I'm head of the Near East section in the African and Middle Eastern Division at the Library of Congress. And this archiving project is going to dovetail, I think, very, very nicely in with Sean and Rebecca's, because it covers archiving the websites. And one of our big challenges was archiving the social media. And it also dovetails in many respects about the COVID-19 environment that they talked about. And I'm going to delve into also the challenges of how we approach this project, merging into telework, just everyone piled in all at the last, just very quickly in March and April. And the challenges we faced in being very productive in telework, and how we used this project with our staff to get to the point where we could actually capture and archive our COVID-19 websites. So I thought today I would just open the toolbox and show kind of how we did this. First of all, just to contextualize where we are, we're in the general and international collections that serve as the major research center for Africa and the Middle East, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. And we have Africa with all sub-Saharan Africa in one section. And to point, they also were archiving websites, our Hebraic section, as well as the Near East section. So about the web archiving, we went into this telework environment, and many of the staff did not have Library of Congress telework machines that let us get behind the firewall. This is going to be one of our constraints as I talk further through this. But they were using their own computers at home. And what I was trying to do is devise projects that could be done with this environment where they only had maybe Microsoft Word, Excel, no specialized software. And we had done other projects to capture websites from Middle East countries. But at this product, kind of to start at the back end, and I'm showing a web archive site here. We had done things with social justice, and in the past had done things about human rights. And this is a finished website, and I'm interested in talking with Rebecca and Sean about the output of getting the website through the ingest process into the part where it's actually displayed online. So with all of these, why did we want to start this? Well, in our Near East section, as well as throughout the library, we are trying to capture the big events. And in our web archiving, we had done the Arab Spring. But with this particular project with COVID-19, we thought that researchers would want to do comparative analysis of governmental and media response to COVID-19 in the vernacular languages. This was our specific focus, because in our Near East section, we actually are custodial for those language collections. So the entire focus was to capture major governmental or NGO sites in the MENA region in those languages. So who is going to do this? So our area specialist librarians are recommending officers. And in our tool, Digiboard, it's only available to the recommending officers who put the nominations into the archiving Digiboard tool. And then metadata librarians pick up on that and create e-resource records. And then the web archiving team ingests and captures those sites and sets up the crawl. And the policy experts decide what the rights and access are going to be, because not all sites grant permission or give you the ability to crawl their sites, and the ones that do set up restrictions on those. So the tool that I spit out to our staff was to use Google Translate to locate the COVID-19 sites for ingest. So we would navigate to Google Translate and enter search terms in English, because a lot of these sites, as noted before with Rebecca, that these terms were different in what we would normally anticipate for COVID-19. And you could select your official language for your country and put your terms that you were looking for. For example, here I was looking for the Ministry of Health website. So for our purposes, it's a very labor-intensive piece of work to get a site that is going to go through all the parameters and requirements of Digiboard. So we want to be sure that it's going to get the correct terminology. So here, COVID-19 Salik Bakanla web sitasa. So once you have that, you can actually use the copy feature and then copy those searches into the regular Google search box. And what we're looking for our Digiboard ingest is to have high-level, very accurate and authoritative sites that we're going to recommend and nominate. And we need these data elements. I'm going to go through all the data elements in a minute, but I need to have the government high-level URL. And I can also translate this page back into English because I'm going to have to pick up the actual organization that is hosting this site. It can't just be everything. The other critical component for our Digiboard archiving tool, and this is why we have so much trouble with social media sites, is that we're going to have to find an email address that we can put into Digiboard, because Digiboard automatically sends out the email to that address to get the permission to crawl their site. And without that, it's not going anywhere. It's not going past any nomination process. So like Deborah and Sean, I sent this Excel spreadsheet to our staff so that they would have the ability to fill in all the data elements that were required. So we have to have the exact website URL, singularly, its top-level domain. We have to fill in, these have to be filled in English for Digiboard. The abstract, what is this website about? Because we're going to see that a lot of this helps the catalogers create e-resource records, the metadata behind the scenes. So we're putting in this abstract, the country, and our categories are a little bit different. For Digiboard, this is not-for-profit, governmental, journalism, and we have to provide a full in-depth justification about why we selected that website, define its frequency. So I'm going through some of these just pretty quickly on the slides. These are all the data elements for it to be archived for each and every website. So you can see this is very labor intensive. In our recommending officers, we're recommending websites in Mohamed Salgi's on this call to Arabic websites. We had Afghan websites. I was recommending Turkic ones. Here are our categories, and there's definitely it's a drop down. So for our Digiboard, we can only select these types of sites. We can choose, of course, fill in that abstract and the frequency that we want the crawl. Here are some of the other data elements, the languages, justification. You talked about the subjects. Yes, they're LC class, but they're in a drop down. We can only select certain ones. We did, of course, select the COVID-19, but a few additional ones. Tags are where we have the opportunity to select some keywords that can work in the site once it's put up on the external public-facing websites. Now, scope is a related website. So perhaps that website has a subsite. The Ministry of Health may have a sub-department that is working on a particular or work closely with an NGO. Does it have a Creative Commons license? And what permission type did they give it back? They have to respond back and give permission, and we have to have their contact name, contact email. So here we are going into Digiboard to nominate a site. And this is on the back end. So these are just screenshots that I'm taking to nominate a single site. The library has a system in this massive collection of digital archiving where it has to have a high level approval to decide that this is going to be a collection. And since we were trying to get these in relatively quickly while we were in this telework situation in April, May, June, we had the ability to archive single sites. And eventually they could be pulled into a collection. And so far, eventually several of them have been, but it's not everything. So they are being crawled, but not all will be selected to be pulled up onto the external website for display. So once we nominate this, we create a new entity. And it's called an entity, and it has all these data elements. For example, this is the example of the Turkish Academy of Science, which was a very high level reputable site in Turkey. Going into this, its category is governmental, and we select all of these in drop downs. Here I had to put in a justification of why I selected that site. And I could identify tags and I could put in those keywords there, but here's my drop down for the LC subject heading. And I could suggest a scope, which would be another website that was closely aligned to that, and check whether it's the creative license, permission. Here I had to put in the contact name, email, all of those data elements. That's why we used the Excel spreadsheet. So once we had all of those lined up on the Excel spreadsheet, we could quickly copy and paste them into the required element areas in Digiboard. Then this entity is submitted for pre-crawl. And this is the web archiving team on the back end deciding whether we had identified and submitted all the required elements. It goes through that review process. And that's why this email is so critical. It has to be a valid email address with somebody who's going to respond to that automatic sent message and give us that particular permission so that we can start to actually crawl. And that site was actually submitted for crawl, and it is being added to the collection level of the archiving project for these languages. One thing they decided was they did not want a whole lot of sites out of every single country. They're archiving them very selectively. So for example, I submitted several sites for Azerbaijan, and they decided that was too closely aligned to the ones with Turkey. They still are archiving those, but not going to be part of this collection display. So I thought I'd show this one on the slide. This is when it gets pulled over to the public side. It shows the archived website tracking COVID-19. One thing I wanted to show on this slide was you can actually view the individual captures with this. And the title is the Tracking COVID in the OECD, and it's part of this coronavirus web archive. So this has actually been pushed out to the front side. And there's my contact information. And if I have a moment, I'm going to attempt to show the actual site that I just showed.
Thank you very much, everybody. Very, very interesting presentations, really interesting work that our colleagues are up to in these curious times that we're all in. And I'll just start by contributing a little story, which happened to me at the beginning of all of this. I was sort of amused that UCLA Center for Middle East Studies invited me and a couple of other librarian colleagues to speak to their own graduate students because they still have a vacancy in their librarian position. So I found myself in the curious position of having to tell UCLA students what they could access online and remotely. Me, myself, not having access to the identical resources that they do, although the overlap between Yale and UCLA is probably pretty large, but still I had to sort of keep that in mind. And everybody was kind of scrambling at the beginning, and all of us were too, I know, to figure this out. You know, how can we make things available now that our libraries are completely shut? And I have to also confess a sort of secret, I don't know, kind of like a secret, like ha 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 kind of feeling, because you know I sit in my office and my reading room is right next door to my office, and I hear the students, I hear the professors telling the students, "Oh, don't worry, everything is online." And when this all happened, I was like, "Aha! You thought everything was online, and now you know the truth. You know how important these other resources are, and how hard we are all working to make available what we can." So that's just a thought that I have on response
Yeah,
to
Robin?
pandemic. Yeah.
I think I can quickly show this in 1 minute.
Okay, quickly, please.
Very quickly. So here is the actual archive website, and you go here on the library's main webpage and drop down and look for archive websites. And this is when it's actually pushed through and it now appears on the public side. And I wanted to click on this one about the COVID-19. And what I'm pointing out here is that this was put in through the Digiboard process. And here's this title and created and subject headings. And all of this metadata is a lot of it put in the Digiboard format. That scopes word, English is the language of this one. But it's very important here in the rights and access. And this cite the items sort of thing. And so all of these elements are already predetermined, and it's very labor intensive to get these sites in. So I'm going to quick sharing that, and please go and look at these archived websites because it shows some of the complexity, and it is a single site sort of thing. And I love the idea of this social media that Rebecca and Sean have talked about, because that is our challenge. This tool, Digiboard, doesn't accommodate social media and how you ingest massive amount of materials. But I may start a question out. Is this going to get pushed through to a public website, all of the social media, or how is it pushed through to actually be displayed?
Jen, is that a question for Sean and Deborah?
Yeah.
So Deborah, Sean?
Sure, yeah. So because the project is still in process, it's not yet public, but the idea is once we have, I guess, a quorum of sites that our fearless leader, Samantha Abrams, has decided work, they will be made public on the Ivy Plus Web Archiving Initiatives page. Does that sound right, Sean?
Yeah, we had an updated meeting yesterday. We were hoping to be live by now, but we've had a few hiccups along the way. So it should be live 2021, hopefully. Pandemic will still be rolling through, so it should be okay.
But I'm going to repeat, since it's still a work in progress, I put the nomination form in the chat. Please do nominate. We would be happy to have your submissions.
If you'd like to join, Rebecca, Deborah, and I are happy to have you as a colleague.
Yes.
That would be great, because our Digiboard tool just simply doesn't accommodate the social media sites. It only accommodates the websites with the kind of the static. It doesn't, it can capture several layers down, but it doesn't work well with social media.
I see that Heather has her hand up.
So, Deborah and Sean, are you meaning for the submission form to be kind of shared more broadly, or is that more oriented towards like librarians?
I think it can be anyone. Initially, we were sending it just to librarians, but if you know of people who aren't librarians, please, and you think they can submit great stuff, absolutely share it.
Cool. Thanks.
Great. Just a warning, I can't always see raised hands on video, so do feel free to just jump in, unmute yourself and jump in. There's a lot going on here, so, and I've only got 2 hands, 2 eyes. So, other questions for our panelists?
I have a quick question.
Sure, Jake, go ahead.
For Heather, it's wonderful what you've done with Hazine and transforming it, and been following it since Nir and Chris had started it some years ago. But I'm also seeing that, I mean, this is true of everything, like what they spoke about Amir, that there's a number of updates that need to happen in some of the articles, the archives, especially. Just one that caught my eye was Topkapi. They completely changed the ministry overseeing it this last year, from the Ministry of Culture, which it had been under for many years, to the new museum ministry, things like this. I guess my question is, how would you go about updating all of that? I myself, I was still a little bit mystified by the whole changeover. I had permission to go back, and then it was not granted. So I can't say anything. I haven't gone through the whole process again. So I don't know, what you would recommend, really.
Well, sometimes we have like researchers contact us and say, oh, I just went to so-and-so and like I noticed that things changed and I'm happy to, and they'll offer to do like a sort of update of the piece. But like, I guess we haven't really done like sort of an audit of how up to date like everything is, and that's kind of a good point. And we're also like, whether even if you yourself don't necessarily want to like overtake like updating the actual piece, like we'd be also happy to take that information.
I wish, but as I said, I was denied. Nir had asked me a long time ago to do one for Dar al-Kutub, and that place is notoriously difficult. And even I'm trying to follow what are the rules and procedures, having worked there, is not so easy. I mean, there's a certain established protocol, but then there's the reality of what do you want exactly, and which department, and who do you apply to, and then the revolving heads. And that's been a big issue, in places like Egypt, many other Middle Eastern countries where, because of the politics and things of late, Turkey is another example too, because of, since 2016. And I think that's one of the hardest things to keep on top of is just who's in charge and who do you write to, who do you contact? So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. No, that's good to think about.
Yeah. Malik asked a very good question, which is about sustainability of these projects. And actually, that's a point I've raised in previous sessions that were similar to this that were held at MESA. This is pretty much for all our presenters, all of these various projects where you're collecting these things. Can each of you talk a little bit about sustainability? And by that, I mean, like in 10 years, will this still be available for us to refer to? Not like how green you are, so. Anybody, Deborah?
I think I'm actually going to ask Sean to answer this because he's been working more closely with Samantha than I have. I would just say that generally, because it is a web archiving project, the idea is that so Samantha is based out of Columbia, and they're the ones doing most of the tech and the crawling. The plan, because it's archiving, is just to make sure that it exists in perpetuity. I don't know the technical side of that. Maybe Sean, you can add to that, but that's the idea.
I'll just add that long ago when I was at Penn, I had a conversation with the development officer of the library, and he said, and I asked him about these like spaces in libraries that are named for people who give money. And I asked him, I said, so this person named this room, but you just took the nameplate off. Didn't he give the money in perpetuity? And he said, in our business, perpetuity means 10 years. So having said that, Sean, would you like to say something?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm putting it in the chat. The archives, the Ivy Plus Confederation Archive project, all of the projects are there. I mean, as far as I understand, this will exist as long as Ivy Plus exists, and I don't think Ivy Plus is going to go away in 10 years, maybe 12, but not immediately. The websites that we nominate in our archive, that happens on a monthly basis. And as far as I know from Samantha and conversations with her, this stuff is permanent. So that's what I understand.
Peter, how about Amir? What's the sustainability projection for?
Well, you know, as long as Google maintains Amir, maintains Blogger platform, I think we're fine. We are basically intermediary between the, you know, the producer of the digitized content. I am very worried about those small and large institutions. And Robin, you know well how easy it is to lose a digitized content even by a large institution. So we have no control. You know, as Amir, we are basically sharing and consolidating information. We have no control what happens with the individual projects that we have compiled, and this is a challenge because very many of them have now went offline, and it's troubling. You know, it is troubling.
Just to share from the library using the Digiboard, it's very methodical and very detailed approach to it through all the approval. These sites, once they go into permission and they are being crawled because they have permission to do it, they're ingested into this, we call it content system and storage, and then it's cataloged, and then those records are put into the metadata, and those are put out on the public facing website. And I think I can get this up now. It's just sharing the Egyptian archives from 2011. So it's definitely the way they're doing it. And with this tool, the purpose is to have that available or archived in perpetuity as a way of actually being able to display this content years later. So I don't know if I can quickly do this. And so this Egyptian election archive, these are most ephemeral things that can be imagined. These election websites come up and come down. So the library is very intentionally collecting election in a special archive. And if you click on any of these, they're from 2012. And this is the intention. So once these sites are crawled and approved and put into these collections, then that is the whole intention, to keep them perpetually available.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago, well, during the 2011 revolution, you know, and everybody was posting all this amazing content, and there were videos and there were tweets and there was all this neat stuff. And there were so many attempts by mostly sort of homegrown efforts to try to archive that stuff. And I did a webinar for CRL later in that year, where, thank heavens, I took a whole lot of screenshots of the things that existed at the time. I did an update to that presentation for a MESA meeting a few years after that, and almost everything that I had taken screenshots of had disappeared and was never collected or archived by anybody. You know, a couple things got sort of rescued, like the Tahrir documents got rescued by UCLA, but there were all of these, you know, people were like trying to use Flickr, and they were trying to use Facebook, and they were trying to use various tools to collect and keep things. I was using Delicious, if you remember that, and I had even developed a whole taxonomy of, you know, so that I could find things the way that I wanted to be able to find them. And well, Delicious is gone, and all the stuff I collected is disappeared. Ian Strawn, who was our colleague at Brown, did a terrific page on revolution in the Middle East for a subject guide for the Brown Library. And I wish I had archived that, because he also had collected a whole lot of stuff on his guide, and almost, well, I won't say almost all, but many of those links simply don't work for so many different reasons. So you know, sustainability is a real issue with this kind of stuff. And Peter referred to projects of large institutions. Remember OASIS? Remember that? That was a fabulous project that was developed by one of my predecessor, Simon Samoil, and a tremendously useful tool. For those who'd never heard of it, it was a union catalog of the actual detailed periodicals holdings of journals, magazines, newspapers, any kind of periodical publication, either published in the Middle East on any subject or published outside the Middle East on Middle East studies. This is a tool I used a lot. And when I arrived at Yale, we were in the process of sunsetting that project. And then it was handed over to AUB, and they did their best. They developed a whole new interface for it. They asked the old original contributors to join again. And it seems that other than Yale, it seems that nobody else did. So now OASIS is gone, and that was an amazingly useful tool. So, you know, I have my own personal reservations about the word perpetuity and the word sustainable. So, but anyway, you know, these things are definitely inherently problematic and quite fugitive.
Robin, I know we're at time, but there's a question from Christine in the chat regarding use of Wikimedia and so forth to make the projects more visible.
Hi, yeah, I guess I'm asking, yeah, just, you know, as you're all thinking about sustainability and sort of visibility of these incredible projects, I'm just curious. I know that there's a Wikipedia session happening tomorrow or the following day, but I'm curious about, as I'm sort of finding myself or learning a lot about the Open GLAM movement and sort of the role of Wikipedia and, you know, kind of working with libraries, I'm just curious if that's part of sort of the way you're all working in terms of trying to make sure that these, you know, that these projects become visible in different ways, or especially with the open access material. Are you, if you don't have the material, I guess, are you seeing these things on Wikipedia or on Wiki Commons, for example?
Thank you, Christine.
Yes, that's an excellent question. We are actually terrible at archiving ourselves. I mean, that's a fact. We all know very well. You know, I'm terrible at archiving my own personal life, and as a professional librarian, you know, it's a challenge to archive my work. I'm glad, especially now that like everything is, all my documents are now emails or shared files, whereas, you know, for my predecessors, like in the 90s, I can still go back to an archival box, you know, and I can pull folders out, and I can, you know, they didn't keep everything, of course, but there's still a lot of juicy stuff in the archival boxes. But when I leave my job and my email account is terminated, all the stuff that was in there is also gone. So, because we don't have records management plans typically, and there's a lot of other obstacles. But I think Iman, who I think is here today, noticed that there is a Wikipedia article about MELAnet, and we didn't write it. Somebody else wrote it. So
you probably shouldn't write it yourself. Someone else should be doing it.
I guess not, but we do need to sort of pay attention to it. Yes.
I guess, yeah, my question was less around like archiving the work of MELA, but in fact, these individual projects that you're all presenting, sort of bringing them or linking them to Wikipedia or Wikimedia, because then through searches, people find them more easily. So again, in speaking about these like incredible projects that if they're used, you know, librarians like yourselves may be conveying, you know, their existence, or Hazine kind of conveys the existence of these different incredible projects, sort of, you know, linking them to, or just, you know, sourcing them in Wikimedia or Wikipedia pages, may just bring more people to it. And I just ask that. I'm not a Wikipedia expert, but at the same time, the Creative Commons conference is happening now, and a lot of, this is where, or summit rather. So there's a lot of discussion around like what gets seen, what doesn't get seen. And, again, a lot of that is sort of being SEO compliant. And so a lot of this is much more technical. So I'm not at all a librarian or an archivist. I'm a researcher who is in awe of the work and appreciative of all the work that everyone here does. So just thinking about ways of searching and these processes.
I just want to add to that. Thank you so much, Christine, for that question. When I joined this project, my big question to everyone was, how is this actually going to be found? And I'm still asking that question. So I just wanted to say, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think we do need to think in broader terms about what access is and what discoverability is with these kinds of projects. So I just wanted to make that comment.
For the project Deborah and I are on, we've had this ongoing discussion of creating a LibGuide, but it's an ongoing discussion that hasn't kind of materialized yet. Otherwise, the sites that we capture only live on the Ivy Plus Confederation webpage. The other presentation with Peter that we gave earlier, Amir is actually, the website itself is being archived at Columbia, but the contents of Amir isn't necessarily being archived yet. It's an idea that a future project, I think.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, AJ is going to be leading a Wikipedia workshop tomorrow. It'll be our very last session at 3:15. So if you have the link to the session registration document, you can sign up for that if you haven't already. Also, if anybody has any trouble with the session registration document, just email me and I can register you myself. I mean, there's always another way to do it, but I'm really looking forward to what we do in the workshop tomorrow. Oh, and thanks for the extra links, Christine. I really appreciate that. I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad you joined us. That's terrific. So I hope everyone's paying attention to the links in the chat. Christine is putting links to the Creative Commons Summit, which actually, to be honest, well, I've been so preoccupied this week, I wasn't even aware, but it's always good to know about what else is happening. Any other questions or comments for our friends? Or anything that our speakers didn't get a chance to say that they might like to add? So, all right, maybe I should just wrap it up then. We'll close up a little early, but it's good. We can have time for a proper lunch break before we start this afternoon. Yeah, I see some faces smiling and nodding, so I think everybody's into the idea of a proper lunch break. All right, then I will wrap this up. Thank you very much to our lovely presenters. The session was recorded, but we will let our presenters review the recording first, and then we'll be in touch with how we're going to share it with people who've registered. So yes, applause, applause. Thank you so much. Go forth and enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you at what was it, 1 o'clock? No. I forgot. Oh, CRL at 1 o'clock. Yeah. Okay. 1 o'clock. CRL. Alrighty. Ta-ta.